The discovery of the rift came without warning. On March 14, 2147, an anomaly appeared on Earth's deep space radar, an unfathomable tear in the fabric of space itself. It was located far beyond the known reaches of the human race's colonies, nestled in the uncharted dark between stars. At first, it was a small distortion, just a tiny, unremarkable flicker in the distance. But as days passed, it expanded, growing larger, more erratic, and more concerning. When the first wave of probes was dispatched, their data sent back to Earth was filled with incomprehensible readings, high-energy bursts, unnatural gravitational shifts, and static. The most disturbing discovery came next. A transmission. A voice, distorted but undeniably clear, emerged from the rift's heart. A single phrase echoed through the communication networks, repeating with each attempt to decipher its meaning. "Come, we await you." The world was thrown into chaos. Governments convened emergency summits. Corporations, hungry for whatever secrets the rift might hold, made their own power plays. But it was the United Earth Coalition that acted quickly. If this was a signal, then the humans had to be the ones to answer. But answer what? What awaited them beyond the rift? And what did those words truly mean? At the helm of Earth's interstellar response stood Admiral Marcus Hale, a seasoned commander with years of experience in military operations. He quickly realized that humanity's future would depend on one decision: whether to face the rift head-on or abandon the investigation and risk leaving the galaxy's greatest mystery unexplored. Captain Elena Voss was chosen to lead the first mission into the rift, and she was not about to let fear determine the outcome. A former combat pilot turned captain, Elena's reputation for fearless decision-making had earned her the respect of both military and scientific communities. But this would be her most dangerous mission yet, and the stakes had never been higher. Aboard the Aegis, humanity's most advanced exploratory vessel, she would command a team of 150 individuals, each chosen for their specialized expertise: scientists, engineers, security personnel, and elite astronauts. The Aegis was a marvel of human ingenuity, designed to withstand the rigors of deep space travel, but no ship had ever been built for the unknown like the Rift. The final briefing was conducted in the war room. Maps of the Rift's location hung on the walls, as calculations and predictions raced across holographic displays. The scientists were eager to crack the riddle, but the military officers, led by Admiral Hale, were cautious. "We do not know what we're dealing with," he said grimly, his eyes scanning the faces of his officers. "If this rift is a threat—" "It isn't just a threat," interrupted Dr. Mia Randolph, the lead astrophysicist. "It's an opportunity. Do you realize what this could mean? A gateway to other dimensions, other realities, our knowledge of space, of time. This could change everything." But Hale didn't look convinced, or it could be something far worse than any of us are prepared for. Captain Voss stood up, her presence commanding the room's attention. She knew what needed to be said. "I'm aware of the risks, but humanity doesn't wait on the sidelines. We go, and we answer." With those words, the crew of the Aegis was assembled. In just a few days, the ship would launch into the unknown to face the Rift's call. But as the Aegis departed, there was something that even Captain Voss couldn't shake: the eerie, underlying sense that the Rift had been waiting for them all along. The Aegis soared through the void of space, a sleek silhouette against the backdrop of distant stars. The journey to the Rift was long, too long for comfort, but every crew member aboard was driven by a single, undeniable purpose: to answer the call that had rattled humanity to its core. The ship's sleek, reinforced hull hummed with the energy of its advanced engines, its vast array of scientific instruments scanning the nothingness ahead, searching for any clue as to what lay beyond. Captain Elena Voss paced the command deck, her boots echoing on the polished floor. The low hum of the ship's systems was the only sound, but beneath that hum, an undercurrent of unease lingered. She had spoken to her crew members in the days leading up to the mission, assuring them that they would be ready for whatever awaited. But the rift wasn't something they had trained for. No manual, no theory, could prepare them for this. "Captain," Dr. Mia Randolph's voice broke through the silence. The astrophysicist stood beside a holographic display of the rift, her fingers tracing its ever-growing mass. "We've calculated its size again, and it's expanding faster than expected. The data's conflicting. It's as though the rift is changing its shape as we approach." "Any idea what's causing it?" Voss asked, her voice steady despite the unease tightening her chest. I don't know. The energy signatures aren't anything we've encountered before. They're inconsistent, but the closer we get, the more alive it seems." The word sent a chill through Voss's spine. The rift wasn't a natural anomaly, it was alive. She shook her head. She had to focus. There was too much at stake. "Keep me updated." "Lieutenant, how's the ship holding up?" Lieutenant Jacob North, the ship's second in command, glanced up from the tactical console. "Engines are stable, Captain. Nothing out of the ordinary, aside from some minor fluctuations in the field generators. But it's nothing we can't handle." Voss nodded. She trusted her crew. They were the best humanity had to offer. But she also knew that no one was truly prepared for the unknown. As the Aegis neared the rift's edge, something began to shift. The stars around them dimmed, the fabric of space stretching and warping, as though the universe itself was bending to the will of the rift. The ship's instruments went haywire, readings spiking and plummeting without warning. One of the scientists in the observation bay suddenly gasped, pointing at the viewports. "Captain, look." Voss rushed to the bay's observation window, her eyes widening. The rift was no longer a mere anomaly. It was a tear in reality. The fabric of space within the rift shimmered like oil on water, its edges undulating as if it had a pulse. And within the rift itself, distant, distorted shapes moved, shadows that shouldn't have existed, shapes that watched them. Her heart skipped a beat. "What are those?" someone whispered. "I don't know," Voss said, her voice low, her mind racing. "But I think they're waiting for us." The tension in the room was palpable as the crew watched, transfixed by the spectacle before them. No one spoke. The whispers from the rift had intensified, but now they weren't just in the static. They were more real, clearer. They were in their minds. Suddenly, the ship's AI, Celine, interrupted the quiet. "Captain, I am detecting an unknown signal. Frequency match, human vocal patterns. Messages, repeating." "Play it," Voss ordered, her voice calm, but her hands trembling. The voice was soft, almost soothing, and yet there was something unsettling about it. It was the same phrase, repeated endlessly. "Come, we awake you." Voss's stomach twisted. It was as though the rift itself was pulling them in, calling them to cross a line from which there was no return. Her crew exchanged nervous glances, their faces reflecting a mix of fascination and dread. She could feel it too, an unshakable compulsion to move forward, to answer the call, no matter the cost. "We're too close to turn back now," Voss said, though she wasn't sure if it was a declaration or a desperate attempt at reassurance. "Prepare for entry into the rift. Keep your focus. We don't know what we'll find, but we're going in." The Aegis shuddered as it crossed the rift's threshold, a violent tremor rattling the entire ship. Outside, the void seemed to twist and fold, the stars bending in impossible angles, disappearing as though they were never there at all. The ship plunged deeper into the heart of the rift, and the crew braced themselves for whatever lay beyond the edge of the known universe. As the darkness enveloped them, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. And now, something else, something far more sinister, began to stir within the shadows. The moment the Aegis crossed the threshold into the rift, the ship was violently shaken, as though it had been caught in the grasp of a cosmic hand. The walls of the command deck groaned under the pressure, lights flickering as the ship's systems strained to stay operational. Outside the viewports, the stars had vanished, replaced by an inky, swirling blackness, an empty void where space itself seemed to bend and warp. But the most unnerving part wasn't the bizarre distortion of reality. It was the whispers, the faint, distant murmurs that seemed to emanate from every direction, impossibly filling every corner of the ship. At first, they were soft, indistinct, like a forgotten memory. But as the Aegis moved deeper into the rift, they grew clearer, louder, unmistakable. It was as though the rift itself was speaking to them, calling them, its words seeping into their minds. Captain Alina Voss stood in front of the viewport, her hands gripping the edge of the console, eyes fixed on the shifting blackness beyond. Her pulse raced. She had led her crew into uncharted space many times, but nothing had prepared her for this. The rift wasn't just an anomaly. It was alive, and it was aware of them. Captain. Dr. Mia Randolph's voice crackled through her earpiece. The energy readings are off the charts. It's as if the rift is reacting to us, responding to our presence. Voss turned to her, her gaze sharp. How so? Randolph hesitated, eyes scanning the data flowing across her screen. It's like the rift is adjusting to us, as if it's trying to communicate, but the signals are chaotic, erratic. The more we go in, the more I feel like we're being watched. The hair on the back of Voss's neck stood up. Watched. She had felt it too. But this wasn't just a passive observation. It was an active, probing presence, a feeling of being hunted, not by anything physical, but by something much older, much darker. The ship lurched again, this time with more force. Voss stumbled but caught herself, immediately moving to the command console. Report, Lieutenant. Lieutenant Jacob North's voice was strained, tense. We've lost control of the stabilization fields. Gravity's fluctuating across the ship. It's like the rift's pulling at us. Can you stabilize it? Voss asked, but she already knew the answer. We're trying, Captain, but the systems are failing. Every time we make adjustments, something else breaks down. The sense of panic in his voice was palpable, but Voss couldn't afford to show any doubt. They had come this far, and retreat wasn't an option. She had to keep her crew together, focused. Keep working on it. Randolph, I need to know what's happening to the ship's systems. How long before the rift's influence overwhelms us? I don't know, Captain. The fluctuations in time and space, they're getting worse. The ship is being torn apart on a molecular level. It's as though reality itself is unraveling. Suddenly, a sharp scream rang out from the lower decks, followed by the unmistakable sound of frantic footsteps. One of the crew members, Security Officer Harris, ran into the command deck, his face pale, his breath coming in short gasps. Captain, something's wrong down there, Harris shouted, eyes wild with fear. The crew, some of them, they're changing. What do you mean, changing? Voss demanded, her heart racing. He staggered forward, trying to control his breathing. I don't know. I saw Sergeant Lennox. His eyes, they're not human anymore. And Corporal Dow, her voice, it's not her speaking. Voss's heart sank. She knew what this could mean. The rift wasn't just distorting space, it was distorting minds. She turned sharply to North, locked down all access points. No one leaves their posts until we can sort this out. But it was already too late. The ship shuddered again, and this time, the distortion was worse. A high-pitched whine filled the air, then a sickening pop as reality itself seemed to fold in on itself. Voss's vision swam, and for a moment she was disoriented. The world around her blurred, as though she was caught between two planes of existence. The whispers in her mind grew louder, like a choir of tortured souls, crying out for salvation, or for vengeance. And then a figure appeared in the hallway, a silhouette that shouldn't have been there. It was Lennox, but his form was wrong, distorted, his body moving in unnatural jerks, his eyes black as night, empty, save for the flickering light of something not human. He stepped forward with an unnerving calmness, his voice a guttural rasp. "We are waiting, Captain Voss," Lennox said, his voice not his own. "We are the Rift. And soon you will be us." Voss took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. But before she could react, the figure dissolved into the air, vanishing as though it had never been there at all. The crew was no longer safe. They were in the Rift's grip now, and it was only a matter of time before the madness spread. The Aegis drifted deeper into the heart of the Rift, every moment feeling like a descent into some alien nightmare. The crew's sense of reality had begun to splinter, and the world around them seemed to shift with each passing second. Time itself felt warped. Hours blended into minutes, and minutes stretched into what felt like days. The very fabric of existence trembled under the influence of the Rift. Captain Elena Voss stood at the command deck, her fists clenched at her sides, eyes narrowed in concentration. Her crew had already begun to show signs of psychological strain, with multiple reports of strange visions, hallucinations, and violent outbursts. It was no longer just the ship's systems that were malfunctioning. The crew's minds were unraveling too. And yet, through the chaos, something emerged from the darkness ahead. A massive, imposing structure, unlike anything they had seen before. The monolithic temple, its outline faint against the swirling void. It was a vast, jagged edifice that seemed to be made of materials that defied comprehension. Black stone veined with iridescent lines, constantly shifting and pulsing with a subtle, unnatural glow. It was as though the structure itself had been forged from the Rift's very essence. The ship's AI, Celine, spoke in her cold, precise tone. "Captain, I am detecting anomalous energy readings. The temple, it appears to be alive." Voss didn't respond immediately. She stared at the temple, her mind racing. The whispers had been growing louder and more insistent. Now, with this temple, they seemed almost to pulse in harmony with the structure itself, as if the temple and the Rift shared a singular consciousness. "We're going in," Voss said, her voice firm. "Prepare for a landing approach." As the Aegis descended toward the temple's surface, the crew watched in stunned silence. The ship's hull trembled as it passed through layers of strange energy fields that seemed to shimmer and refract around them, distorting the very space outside. Nothing about this was normal. Nothing about this made sense. But the Rift had never made sense, and this temple, this monument to something other, was somehow part of it. The crew was too far in now to turn back. The ship's landing struts touched down on the temple's surface with a bone-rattling thud. The surface was smooth, yet there were no visible seams, no clear entrance, just a vast, seamless expanse of shimmering stone. "Everyone stay sharp," Voss commanded as she unstrapped herself from the pilot's seat and motioned for the team to prepare. "Suit up. We're going inside." With the airlock sealed behind them, the crew disembarked into the eerie silence of the temple's interior. The moment they stepped through the threshold, the air inside seemed thicker, like walking through a veil of stagnant energy. The walls of the temple shimmered with an iridescent light, as if they were made of some living material that pulsed with the heartbeat of the Rift itself. The architecture was unlike anything human design could fathom. Smooth, organic curves that twisted and spiraled impossibly, as though the very building had grown itself from the void. Voss led the team through the dark corridors, the only light coming from strange, pulsating veins in the stone walls. The structure was impossibly large, stretching far beyond their initial estimates. It felt ancient, yet impossibly advanced. Whatever civilization had built it, they were long gone. And yet, there was something here, something that remained. Deep in the heart of the temple, they found it. A vast chamber, larger than any they had imagined. At the center of the chamber stood an enormous crystalline obelisk, glowing with a pale, otherworldly light. It thrummed with power, its surface shifting like liquid glass, drawing their gaze in like a magnet. The whispers, now clearer than ever, echoed around them, reverberating off the walls of the chamber. The crew stood in stunned silence, each of them feeling the pull of the obelisk. Dr. Mia Randolph stepped forward, her voice a hushed whisper. This is the source. This is what the rift was leading us to. Voss nodded grimly, her eyes fixed on the obelisk. It was like a signal beacon, a calling card from a civilization that had transcended anything humanity could comprehend. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, rising in pitch until they became deafening, a maddening chorus in their heads. Some of the crew staggered, clutching their heads in pain, as if the voices were digging into their very thoughts. Come closer. The words were unmistakable. Join us. Before Voss could react, one of the crew members, Private Anders, suddenly jerked forward, his body moving with unnatural speed, his eyes wide and vacant. He reached out toward the obelisk with trembling hands, as if drawn by an irresistible force. No, Voss shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. The moment Anders' fingers touched the crystal surface, his body convulsed, his form twisting and elongating, his scream lost in the rising cacophony of voices. In a flash of light, his body disappeared, swallowed by the obelisk. The chamber went silent. The whispers stopped. The air was still. The crew stood frozen, staring at the spot where Anders had been moments before. The obelisk now pulsed with an almost expectant energy. It was as though it had fed on him. And now it was waiting. Voss felt a cold dread wash over her. They weren't alone here. They never had been. The temple was not just a structure, it was a prison, a trap. And Anders was the latest offering. Get back to the ship, Voss ordered, her voice hoarse. Now. But even as they turned to flee, the temple's walls began to tremble. The air grew heavier. Someone, was awakening. The moment Voss gave the order to retreat, the temple seemed to come alive. The walls trembled, the very ground beneath them vibrating, as though the structure was awakening from a long dormant slumber. A low hum filled the air, a sound so deep it resonated in their bones. The once silent whispers had now turned into a roaring chorus, drowning out all thought, all reasoning. The crew's ears rang with it, a dissonant symphony of voices that seemed to tear at the very fabric of their minds. Voss gripped her weapon tightly, eyes scanning the dark, twisting corridors. The air had become thick, oppressive, almost as though it were pressing in on them, urging them to stay, to join the voices. But she fought the pull, every instinct screaming to protect her crew. The rift had been a call to them, and it had already begun to take its toll. Move, she barked, as her crew staggered, disoriented by the overwhelming sound. Some of them were holding their heads, eyes wide with panic. Others stumbled, their faces pale, as if something was dragging them down into a pit they couldn't see. Lieutenant North was at the front, eyes flicking over his shoulder to ensure the others were following. Captain, the exit's not far. Just. Suddenly, the floor beneath them groaned, and the walls seemed to ripple like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. The once steady passageways twisted unnaturally, the path to the ship disappearing as the very shape of the temple reformed. It was as if the temple was shifting, growing larger and more intricate, expanding in ways that defied logic. "We're trapped," shouted Private Rice, her voice panicked. She reached out toward the now murky, ever-changing walls. The way out. Where did it go? Voss's stomach dropped. The ship, their only escape, felt impossibly far away now. Their only hope had been to leave quickly, but the temple was no longer just a structure. It was alive. It had been waiting for them, and now that it had their attention, it seemed unwilling to let them go. The obelisk they had seen earlier pulsed at the center of the temple, and from it, a flicker of light grew stronger. The light swelled like a heartbeat, and in its glow, the shape of something massive began to form, a shadow rising from the floor. "Everyone, keep your eyes on the exits," Voss shouted, her voice sharp, but her heart pounded as the floor cracked. She could feel it now, the weight of something far beyond human comprehension pressing down on them. Something older than anything they could understand. The shape solidified, becoming clearer in the shifting glow. It was not a figure in the traditional sense, but an immense, swirling mass of energy and shadow, like a living storm. Out of the darkness, glowing eyes appeared, countless, flickering like stars, all focused on them. It was as if the temple itself had birthed this entity, this terrible presence, and now it was free, staring at them with infinite intelligence and rage. A low voice, guttural and ancient, echoed through their minds, filling the temple with a sound that felt like 1,000 screams colliding in one unified thought. "You have come, you have trespassed, and now you will serve." The voice was not a sound but a presence, shaking the air, rattling the bones of the crew. It came from everywhere and nowhere. The force of it hit them all at once, pushing them back, overwhelming their senses. Voss staggered but caught herself, her mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to stretch and shift, its form both vast and unfathomably complex. At its core, Voss saw flickers of movement, faces, memories, and shapes that didn't belong to any known form of life. There were flashes of alien landscapes, visions of horrors, and vast, unknowable structures, glimpses into realities far removed from their own. It was as if the creature contained the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations, 1,000 dimensions, 1,000 lives, each one bound within the pulse of the rift. Captain Voss clenched her jaw. There was no time to dwell on the enormity of what they were up against. Move, get to the ship now. But the temple was already responding. The walls shifted, closing in on them. The floor itself seemed to tremble, trying to draw them into its depths. The crew ran, hearts pounding, but the way ahead was becoming more and more difficult to navigate. The air was thick with a cold, unnatural weight. It was as if the rift itself was alive, playing with them like toys in its cosmic playground. Voss's comm unit crackled, and Dr. Randolph's frantic voice came through. "Captain, the obelisk, it's opening. Something's coming through." Voss looked back toward the central chamber. The obelisk's surface shimmered and twisted. The air shimmered as something began to push through, a shape materializing. Tall, imposing, and covered in dark, swirling energy. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything they had ever seen. Its form was vast, a creature that seemed to transcend all known laws of biology. Its eyes glowed like twin stars, and when it moved, the very air seemed to bend around it. Before Voss could react, the creature raised a hand. The walls of the temple warped, and with a sickening lurch, the floor gave way beneath their feet. Voss felt herself falling into the abyss of the rift's grasp. But even as she tumbled into darkness, she knew one thing. They had just awakened something far more terrifying than they could ever comprehend. And it was hungry. Voss's world spun. The floor beneath her feet gave way, and she felt herself plummeting into an abyss of swirling shadows, the screams of her crew echoing around her in the disorienting darkness. Time itself seemed to stretch and distort as she fell. The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced. Wrong. Like falling through the very fabric of existence itself. Then, with a violent jolt, she crashed to the ground. Her body ached, bruised from the impact, but it was the overwhelming sense of wrongness that made her freeze. The air was thick with a palpable, suffocating presence that gripped her chest and made it hard to breathe. Groaning, Voss pushed herself to her feet, blinking to clear her vision. The moment she did, she was met with a view that stole the breath from her lungs. She stood in a vast cavern, a hollowed-out expanse of black stone that stretched beyond what the eye could see. The walls were slick with an oily, shimmering substance that pulsed faintly with an unnatural glow. It was both magnificent and terrifying, a place of profound darkness, yet somehow full of an eerie, oppressive energy. The very air felt alive, pressing against her skin as though the void itself was aware of her. In the distance, towering spires of jagged rock jutted upward, their shapes impossible, defying all logic. They were like spines of some giant beast, reaching into a sky that was no longer space, but a writhing sea of shifting colors and geometries. This place, this dimension, was the heart of the rift, and it was more alive than anything she had ever encountered. It was a place of forgotten gods, lost civilizations, and creatures that lived in the space between moments. But most horrifying of all was the presence that lingered here. The creature, the one they had seen in the temple, was no longer just a shadow in their minds. It was here, watching. Its presence was overwhelming, filling every corner of the cavern, pressing down like a suffocating weight on their psyches. "Captain," a voice broke through her thoughts. It was Lieutenant North, disoriented and panicked. He stumbled toward her, looking around frantically, his eyes wide with terror. "Where are we? What happened?" Voss took a deep breath, forcing her mind to focus. She scanned her surroundings, trying to regain some sense of control. "We're not on the ship anymore," she said slowly. "The rift, it's pulled us in. We've crossed into something else, a place beyond time and space." "And the others?" North's voice cracked with fear. Voss glanced around. Their team was scattered in the cavern, some lying motionless on the ground, others frantically looking for an exit that wasn't there. Rise, Harris, and Dr. Randolph were in various stages of confusion, their faces pale and eyes darting around as though they, too, could feel the pull of this alien place. But the worst sight was the hollow emptiness in their expressions, a dullness that hadn't been there before. "The rift has gotten to them," Voss muttered. "They're not themselves anymore." A soft, chilling laugh echoed through the cavern, reverberating off the slick walls. Voss's blood ran cold. The creature, the one that had taken shape from the obelisk, manifested before them, its vast form taking shape from the shifting air and shadows. It was no longer a mere figure. It was something far more ancient, a being beyond comprehension. Its size was colossal, stretching beyond the physical constraints of the cavern, its body rippling with a mass of writhing tendrils, its form shifting constantly like a living storm. But it was the eyes that stood out, dozens of them, glowing and endless, all focused on Voss and her crew. "You have trespassed into the heart of the void," it rumbled, its voice not something heard, but felt deep within their very minds. It was as though every syllable pierced straight into their consciousness. "This place was never meant for your kind." Voss stood frozen, every instinct screaming at her to run, to escape. But the creature's voice held her in place, not through fear alone, but through an overwhelming, hypnotic presence that made her feel as though her very essence was being studied, weighed, and found wanting. "Way," she started, forcing herself to speak through the suffocating dread. "We didn't mean to intrude. We came to understand." "Understand?" The creature's laugh echoed again, its many eyes narrowing. "You think you can understand what has been hidden from your kind for eons. You think you are capable of comprehending the true power of the rift. You are nothing. You are mere specks, insignificant to the vastness of existence." Its tendrils writhed, rippling through the air. "But you have awakened what was dormant. You have become the offering." Suddenly, Voss understood. This was no accident. The rift had not just called them here. It had chosen them. She wasn't just an intruder. She was a sacrifice. The creature's form seemed to shift and coalesce, like liquid metal reforming into something far more solid. Its tendrils reached out, and the space around them began to bend, contoured as if the very reality itself was being drawn into its will. Before Voss could act, the air seemed to freeze. The cavern was no longer just a place. It was a gateway. The creature wasn't just a being of power. It was the key to something far greater, something that would spill beyond the rift and consume all in its path. And it was hungry. "This is only the beginning," the creature's voice thundered. "Now you will serve the rift. Forever." And with that, it struck. The creature's tendrils lashed out like lightning, tearing through the air with an impossible speed. Voss barely had time to react, But she instinctively dove to the side, narrowly avoiding one of the writhing appendages that shot past her. It left a trail of searing energy in the air, burning through the very fabric of the cavern like a blade through paper. The others were slower to react, disoriented by the sheer force of the creature's presence, their limbs trembling as though the very act of movement was an overwhelming effort. North was the first to regain his composure. "Captain, we can't stay here," he shouted, his voice ragged. "We need to fight back." But Voss knew that they couldn't fight something like this, not in any conventional sense. The creature wasn't just a being of flesh or energy. It was a force, a manifestation of the rift itself, of the raw chaos that had given birth to this place. It was beyond the reach of their weapons, their technology, their understanding. Every instinct in her body told her to run, to flee. But the cavern around them was a labyrinth, and there was nowhere to go. The very walls seemed to pulse and shift, closing off any escape. As the creature's tendrils lashed out again, the walls of the cavern trembled, and for a brief moment, Voss saw something beyond the creature, a massive rift opening in the air behind it. It was a swirling vortex, blacker than the void itself, sucking in everything around it, distorting reality as it twisted and turned. The rift had grown, expanded, pulling the very essence of this dimension into itself, as though preparing to birth something new. "Get back!" Voss screamed, pushing North and the others away from the vortex as the ground beneath them began to crack open. "This isn't just a fight. This is a ritual." Dr. Randolph, her face pale and grim, seemed to understand. "It's trying to open the rift wider," she said breathlessly. "Whatever that thing is, it's feeding on the rift's power. It wants to bring everything into this place." The air around them thickened, like the pressure before a storm, and then the voice of the creature filled the cavern once more, vibrating through their very bones. "You are weak. You are limited. You cannot stop what has already begun. The rift will devour your world, and all worlds beyond it. Your kind is not meant to stand against the infinite. Your end is a foregone conclusion." The tendrils lashed out again, this time wrapping around Private Rice, pulling her into the air with a violent jerk. Her screams were swallowed by the creature's growing presence as her body was pulled into the blackness of the rift's opening. Voss could hear her voice, but it was distorted, twisted, as though she were being torn apart by the void itself. "No!" Voss shouted, reaching out instinctively. But there was nothing she could do. In an instant, Rice was gone, consumed by the rift. The walls of the cavern seemed to tremble in the wake of her disappearance, the air thick with an eerie silence. Voss's heart pounded in her chest. How much longer before they were all gone? With a sudden and terrifying realization, Voss knew they had no time left. The rift was feeding on them, not just on their physical bodies, but on their souls, their very essence. The creature was not merely trying to destroy them. It was attempting to merge them with the void itself, turning them into vessels for its own power. She had no idea how much time they had before the creature finished its ritual, but one thing was certain: if they didn't stop it now, their world, and countless others, would fall into the depths of the rift. Her mind raced. They needed a way out, a way to stop this madness before it consumed everything. The obelisk, the crystal from the temple, was still pulsing in the distance, its light flickering like a beacon. It was the key. Voss could feel it in her bones. The obelisk wasn't just a power source. It was a doorway, a bridge between the rift and everything that lay beyond. If she could reach it, if she could somehow tap into its energy, maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. "Randolph, we need to get to the obelisk," Voss shouted, determination surging through her as she sprinted toward it, knowing the others had little choice but to follow. The cavern around them seemed to resist, the walls shifting and closing off paths as if the very environment was fighting them. But Voss pushed forward, cutting through the chaos with her laser focus. The creature's presence loomed over them like a dark cloud, but she couldn't afford to look back. If they didn't reach the obelisk in time, They were all doomed. North, Randolph, and the others struggled to keep up as they ran, dodging the tendrils that lashed out from the darkness, their movements becoming more desperate as the rift's pull grew stronger. The ground beneath them began to distort, folding into itself as if the very space around them were tearing apart. Finally, they'd reached the obelisk. The air around it hummed with raw energy, and its surface was alive with swirling lights. Voss felt the power radiating from it, the pulse of something ancient and unfathomable. It was their last hope, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. "This is it," Voss muttered, her hand reaching out toward the obelisk, prepared to tap into its power, to do whatever it took to stop the creature and close the rift. But as her fingers made contact with the surface of the obelisk, everything changed. The light flared, and the world around them shattered. The rift was no longer just a place. It was a living, breathing entity. And it was awake. The moment Voss's hand touched the obelisk, the energy that surged through her was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just power. It was consciousness, an ancient, cosmic force that washed over her mind, flooding her senses with images of distant worlds, the birth and death of stars, and civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humanity had even begun to crawl. The power of the rift surged, vibrating through her bones, as though it were trying to claim her as its own. But Voss fought it. She could feel it trying to invade her thoughts, twisting her mind, tempting her to give in to its vastness, to become a part of its eternal hunger. "No," she thought fiercely, "I am not one of you." The obelisk pulsed under her fingers, and in that moment, Voss realized something crucial. This wasn't just a bridge. It was a prison. The rift had been sealed away, contained by something far greater than it. The obelisk had been the key to locking it. But the creature, the ancient being, had been trying to break free. And now that it was awake, it was using the energy of the rift to force itself into the universe, to consume everything in its path. "Captain," North's voice rang out from behind her, breaking through the torrent of thoughts and images that were clouding her mind. "The creature's not letting go. It's feeding, taking everything." Voss shook her head, trying to focus. The energy flooding from the obelisk was overwhelming, but she couldn't let it consume her. She had to stop it. "Now, get back," she shouted at the others. "Stay away from the obelisk. It's the key to stopping this." But it was too late. The walls around them began to buckle and collapse as the cavern itself seemed to convulse, writhing as the rift's power was unleashed. The ground cracked open, and the sky, if it could be called that, swirled with colors and geometries that defied reality. The rift was no longer just a hole in space. It was a living entity, pulling at everything, reshaping the very fabric of existence. The creature's form shifted and grew, now taking on a shape that was both terrifying and majestic, an entity beyond time, beyond comprehension. It was not bound by physical laws. Its eyes, countless and glowing, locked onto Voss, and in that instant, she felt its cold, ancient intelligence pierce through her. It knew what she was trying to do. "You cannot control this," the creature rumbled, its voice a thunderous ripple across the void. "You are insignificant. You cannot stop the inevitable." Voss gritted her teeth, refusing to back down. She felt the obelisk trembling beneath her fingers. She could sense it now, the moment of finality. The obelisk was the fulcrum. If she could just align the energies, reverse the flow, she could trap the rift back into itself, close the gate, and seal it once more. But she needed help. She couldn't do this alone. "North, Randolph," Voss called, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Help me. We need to synchronize our efforts. The energy is too much for one person." North didn't hesitate. He rushed to her side, and with a glance, Dr. Randolph followed suit. The three of them placed their hands on the obelisk, their minds focused, pulling every ounce of willpower into the center of the storm. The creature shrieked in fury, its tendrils lashing out, but the force of their collective focus held it at bay. As they pushed, a surge of energy erupted from the obelisk. It shot upward, reaching toward the swirling sky above them. The rift screamed in agony, its energy rippling through the cavern, tearing apart everything in its path. The walls, the ground, the very air, it all seemed to bend and twist, drawn toward the energy. But Voss held firm. She could feel the strain on her body, her mind, but she wasn't going to give in. The obelisk responded. Its surface began to glow with an intensity that threatened to blind them. The entire cavern lit up, and for a moment, Voss felt as though the rift was pulling back, recoiling from the obelisk's power. The creature's form flickered, losing its cohesion, as if the very fabric of reality was rejecting its presence. "No," the creature roared, its voice shaking the air. "You cannot close the rift. You cannot stop me." But it was too late. With one final, overwhelming push, the energy from the obelisk exploded outward, ripping through the rift's presence like a blade through flesh. The cavern shattered, the walls collapsing into nothingness as the energy from the obelisk surged forth. The rift screamed as it was drawn back into itself, its endless hunger quelled for the moment. The world around them collapsed into darkness. And then, silence. Voss felt herself falling. The last thing she heard was the crackling of the energy fading into the distance, and the weight of exhaustion pulling her down into unconsciousness. When she awoke, it was to the soft hum of the ship's systems, the familiar feel of gravity beneath her feet. She gasped, sitting up in an instant, her heart racing. "Captain." North's voice was cautious, filled with concern. "Are you all right?" Voss took a deep breath, her mind still swirling from the experience. They were back. The rift, whatever it had been, was gone. The obelisk had closed it, locked it away again, and she didn't know how long it would stay that way. But for now, they were alive. For now, humanity had survived, and they had answered the rift's call.